Welcome to the Athena 40 podcast, Conversations with Women from the MENA region. This series is in partnership with NAMA Women Advancement Establishment, a United Arab Emirates-based organization founded on the vision of an equitable world for women. In this series, we are hosting exceptional women from the Middle East and North Africa. They're thought leaders, entrepreneurs, and policymakers. And I am your host, Elizabeth Filippouli, founder of Athena 40, an international platform connecting women leaders.
I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome you today, Dr. Alanoud Al-Sharek. You are the director of Ibtkar Strategic Consultancy, and you're leading political leadership and diversity training programs in Kuwait and the wider GCC region. And of course, you wear many hats, but it's precisely that, your journey and your career and your vision for the world, that I would like us to discuss today over this podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
I always, like to take people back to how things started, because I think that it's the first years in our lives that shaped who we become, in life afterwards, informs our thinking, our dreams, what we want to do. And so take us back to your childhood years and share with us what's your homeland, where did you grow up, and who were the people that were inspiring you at the time?
I grew up in Kuwait, in a household that was, very passionate about politics and art and culture. My father started the first Arabic software company, and so we were tech-oriented, but also very much aware of the importance of preserving cultural and heritage in the digital age at a younger age. And I think all of those together informed my future choices. I find myself leaning towards reinterpreting history and preserving it in a new lens. And I think my work in politics comes from those long discussions that we used to have even as children, like if you could change the world, what is one thing that you would do? It wasn't a perfect childhood, but it was a stimulating one.
When you say it wasn't a perfect childhood, and because I always, think that we learn from each other's stories and we get inspired, and very often, we come to overcome insecurities when we hear that other people had to overcome hurdles and obstacles. Would you like to share with us what you mean by not an easy childhood?
I said that it wasn't a perfect childhood because it was very sheltered and very, very family oriented. We come from communities where your family isn't just the nuclear household. My grandmother was living with us, my cousins and my aunts were constantly in the house. And then Kuwait got occupied by Iraqi forces. And at a very young age, I had to leave that very sheltered world and go to boarding school. And my brother went to another school in a different continent. And suddenly, I was kind of out in the world by myself at a young age. And even though, it was a good school and I learned a lot and I loved the friendships that I made there were for life, it was a huge disruption to the world that I was used to live in. And it's not like today, we would have a weekly phone call, if that. Today, even if you're at a huge distance, you can still FaceTime or call or WhatsApp, you can still be connected. But at that time, it really felt like there was this massive break in my life and in the stability that I had grown around, and I was suddenly in uncharted waters. I mean, it was good that it helped me grow and expanded my horizons, but it really ended my childhood abruptly.
Right. How did you handle it? How old were you when it happened?
Well, I was 15 years old, and I handled it, like all young people handle things with resilience and rebellion, and just deciding that this can either be awful or it can be an adventure. And in the beginning, when my father and the rest of my family were still in Kuwait, and we didn't know whether they were going to be able to leave it alive or not, that was pretty awful. But then I realized how lucky I was that I was abroad and alive and able to continue my education. Then you start to look at it like a gift. As a young Arab woman from a sheltered background who gets to be by themselves out in the world, forging new friendships, trying on new identities. So you adjust and you make the best of it. And thankfully, the occupation of Kuwait was resolved in a relatively fast manner when it comes to occupations. But that really left its mark on me, because the country that I came back to eventually wasn't the same, and the demography had changed drastically, and people were sad and they were brokenhearted for the longest time.
So you left a different country to the one that you came back to. How old were you when you arrived back in your birth country, Kuwait?
Well, we all came back the summer after liberation to stay here, but it didn't look the same and it didn't feel the same. And we had lost family members and we had lost friends. And I continued my education abroad after that point, but it just felt we were on one path and one trajectory, and then that future never materialized and it will never happen. And so you had to readjust to this present and have to start over in a way. And it was just a challenging idea that you were starting over in your own country, but you had to renegotiate what that meant.
We sometimes need to readjust our lives, the way we act, our plans very often, because as they say, life is what happens when we plan life. Did your dreams have to be readjusted?
Yeah, I think for an entire nation, their dreams and their aspirations and their sense of belonging was really shattered. And it changed a lot of the things that people were, let's say, putting up with. So for example, when it comes to women's rights, the fact that women were martyred during the occupation really ignited the women's movement after liberation. So the demand to be included in politics really escalated its tempo after that. And when I came back from finishing my master's degree, and I was a young wife and pregnant at the time, I attended the first discussion of a bill to give us our political rights in Kuwait in Parliament. And unfortunately, that bill didn't go through. This was in 1999. And at that moment, I felt, as you say, my life shift, that this was going to be the central question of my life. Why are we being excluded? Is it to do with tradition, religion, this part of the world, or is it part of a greater trajectory to do with women being kept out of power because of historical and biological reasons?
Well, you tempt me to ask you whether you have come to a conclusion about that, because my view is that as women we are, and these are statistics, it's not me believing or thinking about that, as women we are underrepresented across, I think, all industries pretty much. And we are being paid less, we are being given less opportunities, and at the same time, we are being tasked with all different tasks that a human being can, think of. And we do not realize that. We tend to take this as a given. We tend to take this as, something normal. But what a woman does in her life, I personally think, is a multitude of tasks and duties and journeys. So you mentioned about yourself that you came back to Kuwait and you were, a mom, and you were studying, or you had just finished her master's degree, and you were starting your career. So I think that there is an unfairness and injustice in this world for women across all cultures. I don't know if you will agree with me.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. I think it's beyond just gender, Elizabeth. I think it's people who have power and privilege. They will naturally be hesitant to share it. And that manifests itself a lot in the issue of women's rights, because men have controlled historical narrative in religion, in political power, in industry, in commerce, economics, all of it. And so the standard is male, and we are expected to fit in this male standard, which may not work for us. But you're already coming in with a handicap, and people will assume sometimes good-naturedly that it's a level playing field, and that if you had enough merit, then you could prove yourself. Whereas you and I both know that that's not the case. Men have a built-in advantage because these systems were created around their needs and their timetables. And as a woman, you're coming in with a double burden. You have to prove yourself more than a man, that you are, worthy of being there, and you have to adjust your life to fit in to a system that was designed around male needs. I think one of the most interesting things that occurred during this relentless COVID-19 crisis was that working hours changed to be more flexible and maybe to suit the schedules of women slightly more. And the productivity, at least in the conversations that we're having here in Kuwait, the productivity wasn't affected, the output wasn't affected. But at the same time, there's this double burden that now you have to work from home and at the same time take care of your children and your family at home simultaneously. I think we're starting to see shifts in that dynamic, and that's always a good thing.
I think that every woman who's running a household, she hasn't realized that she really is a CEO. So strategy, management, operations, cash flow, everything, human resources, everything that an organization, a company needs to operate in a miniature world, but at the same time with major responsibility, is what every woman who runs the household, her family's needs, is about.
I couldn't agree more. That's a wonderful way to put it. We are all CEOs of our own households.
So what does your typical day look like currently? Talk to us about your life when you came back to Kuwait in 1999. It's been now 21 years since. What was the journey like in terms of your professional evolution? You are an author, you have written multiple books, and you have put your hands on a variety of different social issues, being very active, very vocal, very dynamic, and at the same time working towards empowering women. We will get to abolish 153, we will get to the campaigns that you have been leading, but before then, those 20 years professionally, give us the map. What happened?
Well, I already shared with you that light bulb moment. And really, I went back because I had applied to do my PhD at that time. And I went back and I changed my proposal to look into feminism and to look at the nexus of feminist awareness in literature, because that's what I was pursuing at the time. And I ended up getting a PhD in comparative feminism and looking at the emergence of feminist awareness through literary writings in the Arab world and comparing that with England, which was much more of a historical progression, whereas in the Arab world, different pockets would display different levels of feminist awareness at the same time. And that became my career, whether it's in academia or in research or in the NGOs that I worked with and then I founded. And now it's the main focus of my consultancy, Ibtkar. So really the roadmap began that day in Parliament with my shock and dismay and my anger at being discriminated against because of my gender. And it colored everything that I've done in the past 21 years.
Did you have a supporter on this journey? And I'm thinking about, possible mentor, someone who took you perhaps under her wings. She was there to guide you, to inspire you, to motivate you when things were getting tough. And I have no doubt that, in this journey, which is very adventurous, as you pointed out in the beginning, it is inevitable to have the ups and downs, right? Did you have anyone to hold your hand?
Well, I didn't have a mentor as such, but I had different mentors and different champions along the way. So I'll give you an example of a few. I have a family that was very supportive, and they really pushed me to finish my PhD, even though I was a young mother and working at the same time. And without their support, I wouldn't have been able to do any of the things that I'm able to do. And that has continued to this day. So I'm very lucky in that sense. But professionally, I had many amazing men and women who I say adopted me at different stages and gave me a chance, starting with the professors at SOAS who accepted me as a young PhD graduate with these ideas about the marginalization of the Arabian Gulf as an area of research at the time, and took a chance on me and allowed me to join the London Middle East Institute Advisory Board, and then to convene and edit volumes on the Gulf that looked at the Gulf differently. Of course, being me, it started with women in the Gulf, but also the family in the Gulf and popular and political cultures of the Gulf. And the political figures who supported me while I was doing that, the ambassadors, the diplomats, Dr. Rasha Sabah, who was the only really visible woman in Kuwait's government. She was the Deputy Minister of Higher Education. She was somebody who took a chance on me and supported me. My first female boss at the Arab Open University when I was teaching there, Dr. Alanoud, she also was a mentor and a champion, and she allowed me to take time off to represent Kuwait and do research right after we got our political rights. And that pattern has continued throughout my career. I've had amazing women who were role models and who took a chance on a young, ambitious woman who wanted to make waves, and great male figures who were equally supportive and who allowed me to benefit from their networks and the opportunities that they could create.
You mentioned an ambitious woman, and I wanted to hear from you. How do you define ambition? What is ambition for you?
Well, I mean, that's a deep and philosophical question, Elizabeth. But I think that ambition is, wanting to do things that others either haven't attempted or think are very difficult. So when you have ambition, you look at your place in the world differently from where it is today. And you can imagine a world that will adjust to accommodate that person that you will become. So I think that's what ambition is that you create the waves that are necessary to take you to where you see yourself being in a few years down the line.
I really love your interpretation of ambition, especially because that idea of having the drive to do things that others think they are too big or too complicated or too difficult, and having the courage to go ahead and do it and take it on you to fulfill a mission or to deliver, for others. I think it's a fantastic interpretation of what ambition should be about, really, because we grow along with other people. We impact this world in positive ways together with other people. And in order to do that, we have to think big. We have to set high goals and go for them. So you are a founding member and you currently serve as co-director of Abolish 153. And this is the campaign to end honor killing legislation in Kuwait and the GCC countries. These podcast series are also addressed to wider international audiences who may not be familiar with the situation in Kuwait or the GCC. Would you like to tell us more about that campaign?
I would very much like to tell you more about this campaign. Well, honor killings are when a male family member performs an act of murder or an act of physical aggression, usually against a female family member, because she has dishonored or disobeyed him or the collective family. And the same acts happen everywhere in the world, but they are called different things, right? And it is really a manifest form of gender-based violence that is intertwined with the idea of guardianship and discipline, and the male guardian's right to discipline female kin. And sadly, in Kuwait, we have this throwback legislation that comes from Napoleonic Code, which says that if a man surprises his wife, daughter, mother, sister in an act of adultery and kills her, or kills the person who's performing the act with her, or kills them both, then it's a misdemeanor, it's not a crime. And the maximum sentence is 3 years or a small fine. And when we got our political rights, I got a grant to look into all the legislations in Kuwait that were discriminatory and that could motivate women to vote and to run. And I stumbled upon this legislation and I couldn't believe that this existed in Kuwait. And it took a long time before there was space in the political scene for us to launch this campaign. And it really took my amazing co-founders, these brave women who took a chance on their reputations and careers and even physical well-being, because it's a taboo subject. And before we opened this conversation, nobody was really talking about this openly. People considered it shameful. And we were told that we were shameless, that we were talking about these topics. And I have to tell you, Elizabeth, we were not fazed by that accusation at all. We thought it was more shameful to cover up murders than to discuss legislations that weren't Sharia compliant. They're not a part of our Muslim religion. They're not part of our constitutional rights. And they're certainly in violation of human rights agreements that our countries have ratified. And so within the 5 years that Abolish 153 was launched, we managed to change the conversation, not only in that speaking about abolishing 153 now has become mainstream, and when we started, very few people knew about the existence of this law, but we also had to educate people about the fact that it's not an Islamic practice, and that it's something that does happen in Kuwait, because a lot of people look at our beautiful country as a progressive place and as a fairly liberal beacon within the region, and they can't believe these things happen, but they do. Like, domestic violence happens all over the world for different reasons, and by pretending that it doesn't happen, we are, I think, enabling more of it to happen.
During COVID-19, which have been a few very challenging and very stressful months for everyone on this planet, do you think, or do you have data about domestic violence and domestic abuse being on the rise in Kuwait, in the GCC?
I am sure that the universal trends hold wherever you are, and that when you are stuck at home with your abuser, there will be more violence. And in Kuwait, that has been the case. But in Kuwait, we don't have enough statistics, and we don't have abuse shelters or hotlines. So there's no data that I can point to and tell you, except for the incidental data from Abolish 153 and its sister organization, Ibtkar. And I can tell you that the cases that we've been receiving have been more frequent. But we have been successful in lobbying to abolish this legislation, and there's been a bill in Parliament now for the past 3 years, since 2017, but it hasn't been voted on yet because it's not been deemed a priority. But in August of this year, we finally managed to pass a domestic violence law, Elizabeth. I mean, it's shocking that it took us until 2020 to pass it, but the great news is now we will be able to have functional shelters. We will be able to operate hotlines with trained professionals and really change the situation for a lot of abuse survivors.
This is indeed a major thing. And I wonder, what message would you like to send to international organizations or, I don't know, other individuals as to how they can help? How can they support the campaign? How can they be more active so that things progress faster, reform happens faster?
Well, I think you need a mixture of top-down decisions, real political will to enact quotas and refigure things so that there is a space for female representation. And at the same time, you really need to create a space for civil society movements and for, from the ground up, people who are on the field to create change, organic change within the community. And I think the magic starts to happen in the space between the two, where the two meet. So where you have top-down decisions meeting grassroots movements.
Do you think that social media and the fact that people now can voice their complaints, they can raise their voices in public platforms, in the public sphere, in a more direct way, like through social media, do you think that they help towards such reforms?
Yes, of course. I think social media is very useful, especially in conservative cultures, because it allows you to do a litmus test. It allows you to put something that is a little bit controversial out there and see if there's an appetite to accept it or not. And especially for women, it's been a game changer because it has allowed them to become more visible and not need an ambassador. Now, women and other disenfranchised groups, young people, before, the platforms were really controlled by either the state-funded media or elite groups, intellectuals, etc., that could get an op-ed and get their opinion out there. But now, social media has democratized that. Everybody has a platform. Anybody can get their perspective across. And this allows for multiple narratives, multiple histories to emerge. There's not one state set agenda that we all have to conform to.
One of the topics that I wanted to visit with you is how much religion is part of women's identity in the Gulf region and in the wider MENA region, really. We've heard all these stories about Arab women and Muslim women being criticized for wearing the hijab. But this is, of course, should be a choice. It's a human right to, dress however you like to dress. Is religion defining how a woman in this part of the world sees herself, perceives herself?
Well, I think that's both a social question and a personal one. So when you live in conservative and religious communities, there's a conformist attitude towards what a woman should look like, what a good man should look like, what a good family should look like, what practices should be, and they're all tied into morality dictated through interpretation of religious texts. But it also is very personal, how you interpret your relationship with God and how that comes across in the way you behave, in the way you dress, in the way you carry yourself, etc. And there's also a burden of ambassadorship, I think, on Muslim women and on Arab women, that they have to look a certain way and they have to speak a certain way, and that social media is really speeding up, breaking through those stereotypes in the West, and also accelerating the space for multiple interpretations of what that means in this part of the world.
How do you define empowerment? Because we have this perhaps a little bit vague concept of empowering people, empower women. And to me, it should be a multitude of ways to empower other people. So through building their confidence, through helping them become more resilient, through supporting them into getting into the economy. What is your definition of empowerment?
Well, it's very interesting, Elizabeth, that you bring this up, because this is a part of a conversation that young Khaliji, meaning from the Arabian Gulf, feminists are having. This tension between feminism and empowerment. And my consultancy runs programs that help women run for political office, and one of those programs was called Women and Young People mostly, but it was called Empowering Kuwaiti Women in Politics. And so for me, the idea of empowerment is sort of giving people the space or the tools, or enacting legislations and quotas, creating space, literally taking power from one source and giving it to another. Whereas feminism is more of a all-encompassing theory for progressing women's rights and spaces for women. So for me, I feel like empowerment falls under the umbrella of feminism, but a lot of young feminists in this part of the world see them as being antagonistic. They see the terms as being one led by the people and one led by the establishment. So I think that it's very important to empower young people and women to take up more space and be more involved in policy making. And that's what I hope we see more of, but we're not going to see more of that without a genuine appetite for inclusion. The ladies that were on this year-long training program, Empowering Kuwaiti Women in Politics, part of the training took place in the States, and there they saw these institutions that really focused on supporting women candidates. And it took us 2 years, but we just launched a platform called Mudawi's List, and that's a platform that showcases all the women running for the 2020 election in Kuwait, and it encourages in-kind donations from people with the skills or with services who really want to support women candidates, because they don't have the same resources as the male candidates, and they don't have the same opportunities for experience and for exposure. So we need to go the extra mile to help them get to where they need to get.
I couldn't agree more with you that all of us, even if we cannot become direct activists, we can become indirect activists. And we can do that by supporting causes who support other individuals, in this case, women in Kuwait, to stand for politics, to become part of the decision-making process in the government. So I'm glad you brought this up. What is the website again for someone to visit and support?
My consultancy is called Ibtkar Strategic Consultancy, and the platform is called Mudawi's List. MUDHAWISLIST. And I think what we need is really to have more of these frank conversations, Elizabeth. People tend to get stuck in their own silos, thinking that people outside of their culture or outside of their country can't understand them because they didn't grow up the same way. But when you come down to it, there's much more commonality in our human experience, and it's especially in being women. We might be in different stages of that, and we might come from different racial or ethnic or religious backgrounds, but I think the commonalities is the way to overcome the differences, and we shouldn't be ashamed or hesitant to discuss both the differences and the commonalities and get over misunderstandings together.
I think that the secret lies in our values, Alanoud. When I founded Global Thinkers Forum, which is entering its 10th year anniversary in 2021, the whole core mission was to promote the idea of values-based leadership and values-based decision-making, because values is what unites us as human beings. So having a values system consists of ideas which we share regardless of our backgrounds, regardless of our faith, religion, experience in life. It is about, for example, issues like honesty, family, and better world, which would be a more just world for people. So it is these commonalities that unite us as human beings, and it is beliefs that separate us. So I couldn't, be more supportive of what you just said, that this is about understanding that our commonalities as individuals, as global citizens, as human beings are much more than the differences that usually are constructed in most cases. My final question in a conversation which I have found truly fascinating: are you worried about this world, or are you an optimist? Do you see the glass half full, half empty?
I'd love to say that I'm a realist, but that I don't know why that has always had depressing connotations. So I'm most definitely an optimist. And I see a lot to be optimistic about. I see a lot to be excited about. Even now, when my part of the world is going through a very turbulent time, and I've been through turbulent times before. I've lost my country overnight. I see a lot to be hopeful for. We have a very youthful population, and we have the tools, I think, to transform our societies into places where social justice underlines our value system, as you said. And I see the world becoming really more transparent, and there's more communication, and we know what's happening in other countries, and other countries are interested in what's happening with us, because as COVID showed us, we're more interconnected and more vulnerable than we think we are. And it doesn't matter if you're a G20 country or if you're a small country. At the end of the day, we have very similar fragile human bodies, and we are all subject to this natural order. And I'm beginning to see differences manifest as we come to understand that a lot more. And hopefully those differences will not just be better for women and women work, but it'll be better for our societies as a whole.
Is there a message that you wish to send to other women as we're closing this interview, Alanoud?
I'm always stumped when people ask me for advice or for messages, but One of the most touching things that somebody has told me was that I wasn't afraid to make waves. And I never thought of myself as a confrontational person, and I don't particularly like it, but I think that's what we all need a little bit more permission to do, is when you find yourself angry at an injustice or at a discrimination, to give yourself permission to make a few waves. Not in a way that's going to be destructive to your career or your reputation or that will bring other people down, but enough to enact change in whatever small way you can.
Thank you so much for this conversation today. Alanoud, I wish you the best in your work, and I hope to be able to see you soon in this, very weird times. We're now, not able to do physical meetings or travel as much as we used to do. But I do hope that things will change for the better soon. And if we join forces, if we continue acting together and striving together for a better world, I think that we will see progress.
Thank you so much for having me, Elizabeth. And I agree with that sentiment. I look forward to seeing you and the progress soon.
Thank you for listening to the Athena 40 podcast, Conversations with Women from the MENA region, brought to you in partnership with NAMA Women Advancement Establishment. If you want to get in touch with us, please email us on info@athena40.org. That is info@athena40.org. For NAMA's work, please visit www.namawomen.ae. Keep well, stay inspired and motivated.